Ex-husband marries again, but ex-wife shows up with a billionaire and exposes the ultimate betrayal. What if the end of your marriage was just the beginning of the story? Imagine this. You're invited to your ex-husband's wedding, the man who shattered your world. You decide to go, but you don't go alone. You walk in with a billionaire, ready to expose a betrayal so deep it will unravel everything. This isn't just a story of revenge, it's a story of redemption, of a woman who lost it all and came back to reclaim her power in the most spectacular way. Get ready for a tale of love, lies, and the ultimate takedown. The thick, cream-colored cardstock felt heavy in Sarah's hands, a stark contrast to the lightness she had fought so hard to cultivate in her life over the past 2 years. The calligraphy, a swirling, ostentatious gold, announced the union of Mark Allister and Chloe Kensington. Her ex-husband and the woman he had sworn was just a friend. The invitation was a declaration of war, disguised as a celebration of love. Sarah traced the embossed edges with a trembling finger. She was sitting in her small but tastefully decorated apartment in the quieter part of Brooklyn, a world away from the opulent Manhattan penthouse she had once shared with Mark. The scent of lavender and old books filled the air, a comforting aroma that had become her sanctuary. This single piece of paper threatened to shatter it all. Her therapist, Dr. Anya Sharma, had told her that healing wasn't a linear process. There would be triggers, moments that felt like a punch to the gut, and this invitation was a heavyweight champion's blow. 2 years, 24 months of painstakingly rebuilding her life from the ashes of a 10-year marriage. She had gone back to school, finished her degree in art history, and was now a junior curator at a small but respected gallery. She had friends who loved her for who she was, not for her husband's name or his bank account. She was, for the first time in a long time, content. And then this. She closed her eyes, and the memories came flooding back, unbidden and unwelcome. Mark, with his charismatic smile and his promises of a forever that felt so real. The late nights at the office that she had never questioned. The business trips that were always just a little too frequent. The way he would dismiss her concerns with a casual wave of his hand, making her feel small and paranoid. "You're being insecure, Sarah. Chloe is just a colleague. You know my work is demanding." And she had believed him. She had wanted to believe him, because the alternative was a truth too painful to bear. The truth had come out not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet, soul-crushing discovery. A misplaced credit card statement detailing lavish gifts and stays at boutique hotels she had never seen. When she had confronted him, he hadn't even bothered to deny it. The cold, dismissive look in his eyes was worse than any shouted confession. "We grew apart, Sarah. It happens." As if their decade together was nothing more than a footnote in his grand life plan. The divorce had been brutal. Mark, with his army of high-powered lawyers, had painted her as an unstable, emotionally volatile woman, undeserving of the life he had provided. He had used her vulnerability against her, her grief and confusion as weapons to strip her of her confidence and a fair settlement. She had walked away with just enough to start over, while he had kept the penthouse, the Hamptons house, and the life they had built together. And now, he was marrying Chloe, the woman who had been a ghost in their marriage, now stepping into the light as his bride. The wedding was to be a grand affair at the Plaza, a place where she and Mark had celebrated their 5th anniversary, a night he had sworn was the happiest of his life. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. A part of her, the wounded, broken part, wanted to rip the invitation to shreds, burn it, and pretend it had never arrived. But another part, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of defiance, began to glow in the darkness of her hurt. Why had he invited her? Was it a final, sadistic twist of the knife? A way to flaunt his victory in her face? Or was it something else? A misguided attempt at closure? A belief that she was so thoroughly defeated that her presence would be nothing more than a sad, pathetic spectacle? The thought made her blood run cold, then hot with a slow, burning anger she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She had spent 2 years healing, 2 years learning to be gentle with herself. But maybe, just maybe, it was time for a different kind of healing. The kind that came from standing up, from fighting back, from showing the world and herself that she was not broken. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over a name she hadn't contacted in months. Julian Vance. The enigmatic, fiercely private billionaire who had been a silent but significant presence in her new life. They had met at a gallery auction where he had outbid everyone for a piece by an emerging artist she had championed. He was a patron of the arts, a man whose quiet intensity was as captivating as his staggering wealth. They had struck up an unlikely friendship, born out of a shared love for art and a mutual understanding of the quiet loneliness that can exist even in a crowded room. He was nothing like Mark. Where Mark was loud and performative, Julian was reserved and observant. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were measured and insightful. He had seen the quiet strength in her, the resilience she herself was only just beginning to recognize. He had offered his help during the divorce, a team of lawyers who could have crushed Mark's, but she had refused. She needed to do it on her own, to prove to herself that she could. But this was different. This wasn't about survival. This was about justice. She took a deep breath and typed out a message. "Julian, I have a proposition for you. It's a little unconventional. It involves a wedding." The reply came almost instantly. "Sarah, I'm listening." A small, determined smile touched her lips. For the first time that day. The invitation was still in her hand, but it no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like an opportunity. Mark wanted a spectacle. She would give him one. But it wouldn't be the one he was expecting. She was done being the victim in his story. It was time to write her own ending. The meeting was set for the following evening at Julian's penthouse, a sprawling, minimalist masterpiece overlooking Central Park. The contrast between his world and her humble Brooklyn apartment was not lost on Sarah, but for the first time, it didn't intimidate her. She walked through the private gallery that served as his entrance hall, past a Rothko and a de Kooning, with a newfound sense of purpose. Julian was waiting for her on the terrace, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. He was dressed in a simple black cashmere sweater and dark trousers, his presence a quiet anchor in the vastness of the space. He greeted her not with a handshake, but with a warm, knowing look in his piercing blue eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice a low, calming rumble. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for seeing me," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. He gestured to a comfortable seating area, and a silent attendant appeared with a bottle of sparkling water and 2 glasses. Julian waited until they were alone before speaking again. "A wedding," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I confess, you've piqued my curiosity." Sarah took a sip of water, the cool liquid a balm to her suddenly dry throat. She laid the invitation on the table between them, a silent testament to the reason for her visit. Julian picked it up, his expression unreadable as he read the names. He was one of the few people in her life who knew the full, unvarnished story of her marriage and divorce. He had been a silent confidant, a steady presence in the background of her recovery. "Mark Allister," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the judgment or pity she had received from so many others. "I'm familiar with his work. His reputation, rather." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "His reputation? He's a shark," Julian said simply. "In business, and it would seem, in life. He's known for his aggressive takeovers, for gutting companies and selling them for parts. He leaves a trail of destruction in his wake and calls it success." The description was so accurate, so chillingly familiar, that Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. It was the same way he had treated their marriage, a hostile takeover of her heart, followed by a ruthless liquidation of her spirit. "He's getting married," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "to the woman he had an affair with, and he invited me." Julian placed the invitation back on the table, his gaze never leaving hers. "Why do you think he did that?" "To hurt me," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "To show me that he won, that he has everything and I have nothing." "And what do you have, Sarah?" he asked, his question gentle but probing. She thought for a moment, the question forcing her to look beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal. "I have myself," she said, the realization dawning on her with a surprising clarity. "I have my work, my friends. I have my integrity. It's not nothing." "No," Julian agreed, a rare, small smile gracing his lips. "It's everything." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "So, what is your proposition?" This was it. The moment she had been rehearsing in her mind all day. She took a deep breath and met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a new, steely resolve. "I want to go to that wedding," she said. "But I don't want to go as the broken, pathetic ex-wife he expects to see. I want to go as a woman who is not only surviving, but thriving. I want him to see that he didn't destroy me, he freed me." She paused, letting the words hang in the air between them. "And I want to go with you." Julian was silent for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. She couldn't read his expression. And for a heart-stopping second, she thought she had miscalculated, that she had crossed a line in their carefully balanced friendship. Then, he leaned back, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It was a smile that transformed his usually serious features, making him look younger, almost boyish. "An intriguing proposal," he said. "To what end?" "I'm not sure yet," she admitted, her honesty a stark contrast to the web of lies she was planning to unravel. "But I have a feeling that my presence there, with you, will be disruptive." "Disruptive?" he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue with a delicious sense of anticipation. "I like the sound of that." He stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out at the city. "Mark Allister," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "He's not just a personal enemy of yours, Sarah. He's a business one of mine." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Allister Capital has been trying to acquire a small, innovative tech company I've been mentoring," Julian explained, his voice laced with a cold anger. "He's using his usual tactics, spreading rumors, driving down the stock price, trying to force a hostile takeover. He's trying to destroy something I've helped build." He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. "So you see, your proposition is not just unconventional. It's serendipitous." He walked back to the table and picked up the invitation, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "We'll go to this wedding, Sarah, and we'll do more than just disrupt. We'll dismantle." The word hung in the air, electric and full of promise. This was no longer just about her personal pain, her private revenge. This was about something bigger. It was about justice, on a scale she had never imagined. "What are you planning?" she asked, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Allister is a man who understands only one thing," Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. "Power. And we are going to show him what real power looks like." He extended his hand to her, not as a billionaire offering a favor, but as a partner, an ally. "Are you in, Sarah?" She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face, at the unwavering strength in his eyes. This was a man who could move mountains, who could make empires fall, and he was offering her a chance to be a part of it. She placed her hand in his, her touch firm and steady. "I'm in." The alliance was forged, a silent pact made under the watchful eyes of the city. The wounded ex-wife and the powerful billionaire, united by a common enemy and a shared desire for justice. Mark Allister was celebrating his new beginning. He had no idea he was about to face his end. The 2 weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity, a carefully orchestrated campaign masterminded by Julian. Sarah felt as though she had stepped into a different life, a world of bespoke couture, private fittings, and strategic planning that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. Julian's team descended upon her life with a quiet efficiency that was both awe-inspiring and slightly overwhelming. There was Elena, a former Mossad agent turned personal stylist, who looked at Sarah's wardrobe with a disdainful sniff and declared it a sea of beige apologies. There was Luke, a silver-haired, impossibly chic couturier who spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the power of a perfectly tailored silhouette. And there was David, Julian's head of security, a man whose quiet presence was a constant, reassuring reminder of the seriousness of their undertaking. "This is not just about a dress, Sarah," Elena had told her, her dark eyes intense. "This is about armor. When you walk into that room, you are not just a woman. You are a statement. Every detail, from the color of your lipstick to the height of your heel, is a weapon." And so, the metamorphosis began. Sarah's mousy brown hair was transformed into a rich, chocolatey brown, with subtle, sun-kissed highlights that framed her face and made her green eyes pop. Her skin, under the expert care of a world-renowned esthetician, glowed with a new vitality. She spent hours in the gym with a personal trainer, not to lose weight, but to build strength, to feel the power in her own body. The wardrobe was a revelation. Gone were the safe, unassuming cardigans and sensible flats. In their place were tailored silk blouses, form-fitting pencil skirts, and shoes that made her feel both powerful and feminine. And then there was the dress. Luke had created a masterpiece, a gown of deep emerald green silk that clung to her body like a second skin. It was elegant, but with a daringly low back that hinted at a newfound confidence. It was the color of money, of envy, of new beginnings. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a stranger, a woman she had only ever dreamed of becoming. But the transformation was more than just physical. Julian spent hours with her, not just planning their strategy, but talking to her, listening to her. He taught her about the world of high finance, about the intricate dance of power and influence that Mark had used to build his empire. He showed her the vulnerabilities in Alistair Capital, the cracks in the facade of its success. "Mark's entire empire is a house of cards," Julian explained one evening, as they sat in his library, surrounded by leather-bound books and the scent of old money. "It's built on debt, on risky investments, and on a reputation that is more smoke and mirrors than actual substance. All it needs is a strong enough gust of wind to bring it all down." And they were going to be that gust of wind. The plan was audacious, a multi-pronged attack that would hit Mark where it hurt the most, his wallet and his ego. Julian, through a series of shell corporations, had been quietly buying up Alistair Capital's debt. He had also been gathering evidence of Mark's less-than-ethical business practices, the kind of information that would not only ruin his reputation, but could also attract the attention of the SEC. "The wedding is our stage," Julian said, his eyes gleaming with a strategic brilliance that was both fascinating and a little frightening. "We will not make a scene. We will not shout or cause a scene. We will be the epitome of grace and class, and we will plant the seeds of his destruction with a smile." Sarah's role was crucial. She was the inside source, the one who knew the players, the one who could deliver the final, devastating blow. She spent days poring over old documents, remembering conversations, piecing together the puzzle of Mark's financial life. And in the process, she discovered the true extent of his betrayal. It wasn't just the affair with Chloe. It was the money. The secret offshore accounts. The investments made in her name without her knowledge. The way he had systematically siphoned funds from their joint accounts into his own private ventures. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had stolen from her, had used her as a pawn in his financial games. The discovery was a new kind of pain, a cold, hard anger that solidified her resolve. This was no longer just about a broken heart. This was about justice. The night of the wedding arrived, a crisp, clear evening in late October. As Sarah stood in front of the full-length mirror in her apartment, she felt a tremor of fear, a flicker of the old insecurity. Could she really do this? Could she face the man who had shattered her world and not fall apart? Then, she met her own eyes in the mirror. She saw the woman in the emerald green dress, her posture straight and proud, her eyes clear and determined. She was no longer the timid, heartbroken woman who had cried herself to sleep for months. She was a warrior, clad in silk and armed with the truth. A knock on the door broke her reverie. It was Julian, looking impossibly handsome in a classic black tuxedo. He held a small velvet box in his hand. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as he took her in. "Sarah," he breathed, the single word a symphony of admiration and awe. "You are magnificent." He walked towards her and opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a necklace of breathtaking beauty. A single, pear-shaped emerald surrounded by a halo of diamonds hung from a delicate platinum chain. "A little something to complete the look," he said, his voice soft. The armor needed a finishing touch. His fingers brushed against her skin as he fastened the necklace around her neck, the cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his touch. She looked in the mirror, the emerald glowing against her skin, a perfect match for her dress. It was a queen's ransom, worn with the casual elegance of a woman who belonged in this world. "It's too much," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's exactly right," he replied, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection. "Tonight, you are not just Sarah. You are a force of nature, and they will not know what hit them." He offered her his arm, his touch a steady, reassuring presence. "Ready?" She took a deep breath. The scent of her perfume, a custom blend of jasmine and sandalwood, filling her senses. She was ready. As they walked out of her apartment and into the waiting limousine, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear focus. She was not just attending a wedding. She was attending a reckoning, and she was the one holding the gavel. The Plaza Hotel was a symphony of opulence, a gilded cage where the city's elite gathered to celebrate their triumphs. The ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers, cascading floral arrangements, and the soft murmur of 100 conversations, all fueled by vintage champagne and a sense of self-importance. This was Mark's world, a world built on illusion and performance, and tonight, he was the star of the show. As Sarah and Julian stepped out of the limousine, a hush fell over the small crowd of onlookers gathered outside. The sight of Julian Vance, a man notoriously private and rarely seen at such public events, was enough to cause a stir. But it was the woman on his arm who truly captured their attention. Sarah moved with a newfound grace, her emerald dress shimmering under the city lights. She was a vision of elegance and power, a woman who looked not like she was attending a party, but like she owned the building. The whispers followed them as they walked up the grand staircase, a ripple of curiosity and speculation that was more potent than any shouted announcement. They paused at the entrance to the ballroom, taking in the scene before them. Mark and Chloe were holding court in the center of the room, a king and his new queen, accepting the fawning congratulations of their guests. Chloe, in a dress that was a confection of lace and diamonds, looked radiant, her smile a little too bright, a little too practiced. Mark, dapper and confident in his custom-tailored tuxedo, looked like a man who had everything he had ever wanted. Then he saw her. His smile faltered, just for a second, a barely perceptible crack in his carefully constructed facade. His eyes widened in disbelief, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in the dress, the necklace, the transformation. This was not the woman he had discarded, the broken, weeping mess he had left behind. This was a stranger, a powerful, enigmatic woman who looked at him not with pain, but with a cool, detached indifference. And then he saw the man beside her. Julian Vance. A man whose net worth dwarfed his own, a man whose influence reached into the darkest corners of the financial world, a man who was his rival, his enemy. The color drained from Mark's face, his carefully crafted composure crumbling like a sandcastle against a rising tide. The murmur in the room died down, replaced by a palpable tension, a collective holding of breath as every eye in the room turned to the doorway. Sarah felt a surge of triumph, a heady rush of power that was as intoxicating as the finest champagne. This was the first victory, the first crack in his armor. And they hadn't even said a word. Julian, ever the master of understatement, simply gave a slight nod in Mark's direction, a gesture that was both a greeting and a challenge. Then he turned to Sarah, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "Showtime." They moved into the room, a silent, powerful vortex in the sea of guests. People parted before them, their expressions a mixture of awe, confusion, and undisguised curiosity. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispered questions. Who is she? What is she doing with him? She held her head high, her smile serene and unwavering. She was no longer the invisible wife, the quiet shadow. She was the main event. They made their way to the bar, Julian ordering 2 glasses of champagne with a quiet authority that commanded immediate attention. He handed one to Sarah, his fingers brushing against hers, a silent gesture of support. "Well," he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement, "that was a more dramatic entrance than I anticipated." "You seem to be enjoying yourself," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm a connoisseur of fine art," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "And this, my dear Sarah, is a masterpiece of social disruption." They stood there for a few moments, a silent island in the storm of speculation they had created. They didn't need to seek out the key players. The key players came to them. The first was Richard Sterling, Mark's right-hand man and a major shareholder in Alistair Capital. He was a portly, florid man with a nervous energy that was amplified by the current situation. "Julian," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. "What a surprise to see you here. I didn't know you and Mark were acquainted." "We're not," Julian said, his voice cool and level. "But I have a great admiration for his ambition." The word hung in the air, laden with a double meaning that was not lost on Sterling. "And you must be Sarah," Sterling said, turning his attention to her, his eyes full of a prurient curiosity. "Mark has told me so much about you." "I'm sure he has," Sarah replied, her voice as smooth as silk. "But I have a feeling he left out the most interesting parts." Her smile was dazzling, a weapon of mass destruction that left Sterling flustered and speechless. He mumbled a hasty excuse and retreated back into the crowd, his face a mask of confusion. Next came the women, the wives of Mark's business associates, the socialites who had once been her friends. They descended upon her in a cloud of expensive perfume and feigned concern, their eyes hungry for gossip. "Sarah, darling, you look amazing," one of them gushed, her eyes darting from Sarah's dress to the emerald at her throat. "We were so worried about you." "Were you?" Sarah asked, her voice sweet, but with an underlying edge of steel. "How kind of you. But as you can see, I'm doing just fine." She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her gaze sweeping over them, a silent dismissal that was more effective than any harsh word. They fluttered away, their whispers now laced with a new kind of respect, a grudging admiration for the woman they had so easily written off. Finally, there was Chloe. She approached them alone, her smile brittle, her eyes flashing with a mixture of triumph and insecurity. "Sarah," she said, her voice a little too high, "I'm so glad you could make it. I know this must be difficult for you." "Difficult?" Sarah replied, her eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Not at all. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. After all, it's not every day you get to see a fairy tale come to life." She let her gaze drift over Chloe's dress, her expression one of polite but dismissive appraisal. "You look lovely, Chloe. Tell me, is that a Vera Wang? I remember when Mark and I were planning our wedding, he insisted on nothing but the best." The barb hit its mark. Chloe's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing. She had won the man, but she would always be the second choice, the replacement. And in that moment, she knew that Sarah knew it too. Before Chloe could muster a reply, Mark was there, his hand on her arm, his face a thunderous mask of fury. "Sarah," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sarah turned to him, her expression one of cool, detached amusement. "Why, Mark, you invited me. Don't you remember?" She held up her glass in a mock toast. "Congratulations on your special day. I hope it's everything you've ever dreamed of." His eyes darted from her to Julian, a flicker of fear in their depths. What is he doing here? "Mr. Vance was kind enough to be my escort," Sarah said, her voice as smooth as glass. "We were just discussing business, actually. Isn't that right, Julian?" Julian, who had been a silent but powerful observer, stepped forward, his presence a physical manifestation of the threat he represented. "Alistair," he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "We have much to discuss, but perhaps now is not the time. We wouldn't want to spoil the festivities." He placed a hand on the small of Sarah's back, a gesture of both possession and protection. "Enjoy your evening. I have a feeling it's one you'll never forget." With that, they turned and walked away, leaving Mark and Chloe standing in their wake, their perfect fairy tale turning into a living nightmare. The whispers in the room grew louder, the seeds of doubt and speculation now in full bloom. The grand entrance was over. The battle had just begun, and Sarah, for the first time in a long time, felt the sweet, exhilarating taste of victory on her lips. The rest of the evening unfolded like a slow-motion car crash, a perfectly orchestrated symphony of destruction conducted by Julian with the quiet, deadly precision of a master. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't cause a scene. They simply moved through the room, a smiling, elegant couple, and with a few well-chosen words, they dismantled Mark's world, piece by piece. Their first target was Robert Chen, a conservative, old-money investor whose family fund was one of the cornerstones of Alistair Capital. He was a man who valued stability and integrity above all else, and Julian knew he had been having doubts about Mark's increasingly reckless business practices. They found him by the dessert table, looking uncomfortable and out of place in the sea of new money ostentation. "Robert," Julian said, his voice warm and friendly. "Good to see you. I was just telling Sarah about the new philanthropic fund I'm launching. We're focusing on sustainable, ethical investments, the kind of thing your family has championed for generations." Chen's eyes lit up with interest. "That's fascinating, Julian. We need more of that in this world." "I agree," Julian said. "Which is why I'm divesting from certain volatile assets. Companies built on a foundation of debt and moral ambiguity. It's just too risky in the long run." He didn't need to say Mark's name. The implication was clear. Chen's expression grew thoughtful, his gaze drifting over to where Mark was now engaged in a heated, whispered argument with Chloe. "You've given me a lot to think about, Julian," he said, his voice low. "I think it's time for my fund to reevaluate our portfolio." One down. Next was Maria Rodriguez, a fiery, influential journalist for a major financial publication. She had been trying to get an interview with the reclusive Julian Vance for years. Tonight, he walked right up to her. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, his smile charming and disarming. "I'm an admirer of your work. Your exposé on the predatory lending practices in the subprime mortgage market was brilliant." Maria was momentarily stunned, but quickly recovered her professional composure. "Mr. Vance, the pleasure is all mine. I never thought I'd see you at an event like this." "I'm here with a dear friend," he said, his hand resting lightly on Sarah's arm. "And to observe. You can learn a lot about a man by the company he keeps, and the promises he breaks." His gaze was pointed, his meaning unmistakable. Maria's journalistic instincts went into overdrive. She looked from Julian to Sarah, then to Mark, a story beginning to form in her mind. "Is there something I should know, Mr. Vance?" she asked, her pen poised over her notebook. "I think," Julian said, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur, "that if you were to take a closer look at Alistair Capital's recent acquisitions and the way they were financed, you might find a story worthy of your talents." He gave her a knowing look, a silent promise of an inside scoop that could make her career. "I'll have my people call your people." 2 down. The final and most devastating blow was delivered by Sarah herself. She had been dreading this moment, the face-to-face confrontation with the man who had been the architect of her pain. But as she approached him, she felt not fear, but a cold, righteous anger. He was standing alone on the terrace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. The party was still in full swing behind them. But here, in the cool night air, the illusion of celebration had vanished. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he sneered as she approached, his voice dripping with venom. "Coming here, with him, trying to ruin my life." "Your life?" she replied, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to his barely contained fury. "You mean the life you built on my money? The life you financed with my inheritance?" The color drained from his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I do. I know about the offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I know about the shell corporation you used to funnel money out of our joint accounts. I know that you didn't just cheat on me, Mark. You stole from me." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "You used me? You used my trust, my love, my family's money to build this empire of lies. And you thought you could just throw me away like I was nothing." He was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had underestimated her, had believed she was too weak, too broken to ever fight back. He had been wrong. "It's over, Mark," she said, her voice devoid of the emotion he had always used against her. "Every transaction, every transfer, every lie. I have it all, and I'm not the only one. By morning, the SEC will have it too." The last of his composure shattered. The mask of the powerful, confident CEO fell away, revealing the desperate, frightened man underneath. "You can't," he whispered, his voice pleading. "You'll ruin me." "You ruined me," she replied, her voice as cold as ice. "The difference is, I rebuilt myself. And you? You're about to lose everything." She turned to walk away, her back straight, her head held high. She had said her piece, had delivered the final, fatal blow. "Sarah, wait!" he called after her, his voice cracking. "Please!" She stopped, but she didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Mark." She walked back into the ballroom, into the light, leaving him alone in the darkness with the ruins of his life. She found Julian waiting for her, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. She looked at him, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of release, of catharsis. "I am," she said, a real, genuine smile spreading across her face. "I think, for the first time in a very long time, I really am." He offered her his arm, and together they walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a trail of destruction and the whispers of a scandal that would rock the city to its core. The unraveling was complete. The king had been dethroned, and the woman he had tried to break was walking away, not as a victim, but as a victor, into a future that was brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. The fallout was immediate and spectacular, By the time the sun rose the next morning, the story was everywhere. Maria Rodriguez, true to her reputation, had worked through the night, and her article, a scathing, meticulously researched exposé on the financial misdeeds of Mark Allister, was the talk of Wall Street. The headline was brutal. The Allister Empire, a house of cards built on betrayal. The article detailed not only the impending SEC investigation, but also the personal story of his ex-wife, Sarah, painting a picture of a ruthless, manipulative man who had used and discarded everyone in his path. The stock price of Allister Capital plummeted. Investors, led by the now wary Robert Chen, began to pull out, a mass exodus that turned into a stampede. By noon, the company was in freefall, its value evaporating with every passing minute. Mark was ruined. He was not just financially bankrupt, but socially and professionally radioactive. The friends who had fawned over him at the wedding now crossed the street to avoid him. The business associates who had once clamored for his attention now refused to take his calls. Chloe, his new bride, was gone. She had packed her bags and disappeared in the middle of the night, leaving behind nothing but a note that was as cold and transactional as their entire relationship had been. She had signed on for a life of luxury and status, not for a public shaming and a mountain of debt. Sarah watched the news reports from the comfort of Julian's library, a cup of tea in her hands. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. There was no joy in Mark's destruction, no triumphant gloating. There was only a quiet, profound sense of peace. The storm had passed, and she was safe on the shore. Julian walked into the room, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He had just come from a meeting with the board of the tech company that Mark had been trying to acquire. With Allister Capital out of the picture, the company was safe, its future secure. "It's done," he said, his voice soft. "He's finished." "I know," she replied, her gaze still fixed on the television screen, where a picture of a haggard, defeated-looking Mark was being shown. "It's strange. I thought I would feel more." "What did you think you would feel?" he asked, sitting down in the armchair opposite her. "I don't know," she admitted. "Happy, vindicated, something." "Revenge is a hollow victory, Sarah," he said, his voice full of a wisdom that seemed beyond his years. "The real victory is not in his downfall. It's in your rise." He was right. The real victory wasn't what had happened to Mark. It was what had happened to her. She had faced her greatest fear, had confronted the man who had broken her, and had walked away whole. She had found a strength she never knew she possessed, a voice she never knew she had. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah's life continued to transform. The story of the scorned ex-wife who had brought down a titan had made her a reluctant celebrity, a symbol of female empowerment. She was inundated with interview requests, with book offers, with invitations to speak at conferences. She turned them all down. She had no desire to be a professional victim, to build a career on the ashes of her past. She wanted a future, not a retelling of her history. She poured her energy into her work at the gallery, her passion for art a healing balm to her soul. She was promoted to senior curator, her eye for talent and her quiet, confident leadership, earning her the respect of her colleagues and the admiration of the art world. Her friendship with Julian deepened, evolving into something more profound, more intimate. They were two solitary souls who had found in each other a kindred spirit, a safe harbor in the storms of life. They spent their evenings together, talking for hours about art, about life, about everything and nothing. He made her laugh, he challenged her ideas, he saw her in a way no one else ever had. One evening, as they were walking through Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet, he stopped and turned to her, his expression serious. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "I know the past few months have been a lot, and I know you need time to heal, to find your own way. but I have to tell you how I feel." He took her hands in his touch warm and gentle. "I've fallen in love with you, Sarah. Not the woman in the emerald dress, not the symbol of strength and defiance, but you. The quiet, brilliant, resilient woman who loves art and old books, and who has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Julian," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I've fallen in love with you too." He smiled, a slow, radiant smile that lit up his entire face. And then he kissed her. A tender, passionate kiss that was a promise of a new beginning. A future built not on revenge, but on love, respect, and a shared understanding of the beautiful, messy, and ultimately redemptive journey of life. She had walked into that wedding as an ex-wife, a ghost from a past life. She had walked out as a warrior, a queen, a woman who had reclaimed her power and her story. And now she was simply Sarah, a woman in love, a woman at peace, a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest betrayals can lead to the most beautiful redemptions. The end of her marriage had not been the end of her story. It was just the beginning. And there you have it. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments do not have to define us. It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the power of redemption, and the fact that sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all, but building a life so full of joy and success that the past loses its power. What did you think of Sarah's ultimate comeback? Let me know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of betrayal and triumph, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of real-life drama and empowerment. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.